What if the stories you grew up hearing about your family weren't just myths? What if the creaking floors, the shadows in the corners, and the whispers in the night weren't figments of your imagination? What if they were real? I used to think I was just like everyone else, that my family's stories were just stories. But now I know the truth. My family is cursed, and I've become its next target. You see, the Nelson family isn't just haunted by memories, we're haunted by a promise, a debt we can never escape. And it all began long before I was born. I grew up in a small, quiet town, the kind of place where nothing much happens. Our family home was perched on a hill at the edge of the woods, its windows staring out at the town below. It was an old colonial house, passed down through generations, with its creaky stairs and drafty hallways. My parents loved its history, but to me it always felt heavy. The house had this way of making you feel watched. The long hallways, the dim light that filtered through its narrow windows, it was like the house itself was alive when I was little. I'd hear things, faint whispers. My parents would always brush it off, saying it was the wind or the pipes. But my grandmother, she never dismissed it. She knew what it really was. My grandmother, Eleanor Nelson, was a stern woman, the kind who seemed like she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. She never told stories the way other grandparents did. When she spoke about the family, it was always with a tone of warning, like she was trying to prepare us for something. And then there was the attic. Never go in there, she'd say, her voice sharp as a knife. Some doors are meant to stay shut. I used to ask her why, but she'd just shake her head and say, "Not everything in this house is for you to know." Her words stayed with me, even as I got older, especially when the strange things started happening, especially when the whispers began calling my name. I used to think the stories about curses and spirits were just tales to keep kids from sneaking into dark places. But now, I'm not so sure. Because as I've grown older, I've come to realize something terrifying. The curse is real. It's been watching me, waiting, and no matter how far I run, I can't escape what's coming for me. They say every family has its secrets. The little things people don't talk about. The stories left unfinished. The questions answered with a change of subject. But in my family, those secrets weren't just skeletons in the closet. They were shadows in the corners. They were alive. The Nelson family seemed like any other from the outside. My parents, Paul and Linda, were practical, hard-working people. My dad loved to tinker in the garage, fixing up old tools, while my mom spent her evenings reading by the fire. We had a golden retriever named Max who followed me everywhere, his wagging tail a comfort on the darkest nights. But then there was my grandmother, Eleanor Nelson. She lived with us in the old house, moving into the downstairs bedroom when her health started to decline. She was sharp, even in her old age, her blue eyes always watching, always knowing. There was something about her presence that made the house feel ... heavier. She was the keeper of our family's history, and she took that role seriously. She had journals, photo albums, and an old chest in her room that no one else was allowed to touch. It's family business, she'd say, if anyone asked, and that was the end of it. As a child, I didn't understand the weight that hung over our family. I just knew that certain topics were off-limits. When my classmates would talk about their grandparents telling funny or sweet stories, I'd stay quiet. Didn't tell bedtime stories, she gave warnings. Never make a promise you can't keep, she told me once, her voice low and serious. And never, ever bargain with something you don't understand. I laughed at the time, thinking she was just being dramatic. But now, looking back, I realize she wasn't talking about life advice. She was talking about survival. Her warnings extended to the house itself. She'd tell me to never go into the attic or to stay out of certain rooms after dark. I thought she was just being overprotective. But when I tried to ask her why, she'd grow quiet. her hands trembling slightly as she stared into the distance. "This family has seen enough," she'd say. "You don't need to go looking for trouble even." As a kid, I could feel there was something unspoken between the adults in our family. My dad would sometimes argue with my grandmother about the past, his voice rising as he insisted, "It's just superstition. Mom, let it go." But she wouldn't. "You don't let it go," she'd snap back. "You don't just ignore it. The past has teeth, Paul. It bites." I didn't understand what they were talking about at the time, but the tension in the room would make my chest tighten. I'd sit on the stairs, listening to their voices rise and fall, trying to piece together the fragments of their arguments. And then there were the pictures in the living room. Above the fireplace hung a portrait of my great-great-grandfather, Charles Nelson. He had sharp features, a stern expression, and eyes that seemed to follow you no matter where you stood. I hated that picture. "He's the one who started it," my grandmother whispered once, almost to herself. When I asked her what she meant, she just shook her head. "You'll know when you're older." I never wanted to know, but it wasn't my choice. My family's secrets were always just beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. The warnings, the arguments, the unspoken rules, they were all threads of a web I didn't realize I was caught in. But now, as I think back on those moments, I can see the truth for what it was. My family wasn't just keeping secrets. They were hiding from something, and soon I would find out what. The house on the hill was more than just a home. It was a witness, a keeper of time and secrets. Its walls had seen generations of my family come and go, each leaving their mark on something more. Growing up, I thought its creaks and groans were just part of its age, the way old houses complain against time. But as I got older, I began to understand. The house wasn't just old, it was alive. Our house was a sprawling colonial with tall windows and narrow hallways, built in the late 1800s by my great-great-grandfather, Charles Nelson. It had all the charm of a historic home. Ornate woodwork, creaky floorboards, and a fireplace in nearly every room. But it also had a stillness, a heaviness that clung to the air, like the house was holding its breath. There were little things you could ignore if you tried hard enough. The faint tapping sound that came from the attic at night. The way the hallway always seemed a little darker, even when the lights were on. The cold spot near the bottom of the staircase that never seemed to go away. No matter how many times we checked for drafts, my parents chalked it up to the quirks of an old house. But I couldn't ignore the feeling that someone was always watching. The attic was the heart of the house's mystery. My grandmother kept it locked at all times, the key hanging from a thin chain around her neck as a kid. I'd stand at the base of the narrow staircase leading up to the attic, staring at the door. It was an unremarkable thing painted white, with an old brass knob, but it felt like it was alive, pulsing with a quiet, unseen energy. I once asked my grandmother why we weren't allowed up there. She looked at me with a seriousness that made my skin crawl. "Because some things aren't meant to be disturbed," she said. "The attic is where it began, and it's where it waits." "What waits?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. The way she looked at the door was enough to know that whatever was up there, it was something I didn't want to meet. It wasn't just the attic, though. The house had a way of reminding you that it was always listening, always watching. There was the hallway leading to the bedrooms, where shadows danced on the walls, even when there was no light to cast them. My dad said it was just the trees outside, their branches moving in the wind. But on nights when the air was still, the shadows moved anyway. Sometimes, as I walked down that hallway, I'd feel a prickle at the back of my neck, like someone was right behind me. I'd turn quickly, my heart pounding, but the hall would be empty. The scariest part was the mirror at the end of the hall. It was one of those tall, antique mirrors in an ornate frame. I avoided looking at it at night. Something about it felt wrong, like if I stared too long, I might see something staring back. The house wasn't just airy, it was unpredictable. Things would move on their own. A chair pushed back from the table. A photo frame tilted just slightly to the side. There were sounds too, faint whispers that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Footsteps in the hall when everyone was accounted for. The worst was the knocking. It wasn't loud, just 3 soft taps, always at the same time, just before midnight. I'd lie in bed, clutching my blanket, and wait for it to stop. My parents never seemed to hear it, no matter how many times I asked, but my grandmother did. "It's just the house settling," my dad would say, his tone dismissive. But my grandmother would meet my eyes and say nothing, and in her silence I found the truth. I didn't realize it then, but the house was trying to tell me something. The shadows, the whispers, the knocking, it was all leading to something. Looking back, I wonder if the house was warning me or if it was just waiting for the right moment to reveal what it had been hiding all along. They say the first time you encounter the supernatural, you question everything: your eyes, your ears, your sanity. But when it happened to me, there was no denying it. The house wasn't just haunted. It was trying to tell me something, and it wanted me to listen. It started on a quiet night. One of those nights where the air is so still that every sound feels amplified. My parents were out, leaving just my grandmother and me in the house. She had gone to bed early, as she always did, and I was left alone. In the living room, curled up on the couch with a book, I remember the way the silence felt heavy, pressing down on me. The kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of every creak, every rustle. The house seemed almost too quiet, as though it was holding its breath. Then I heard it, a faint whisper coming from the hallway. At first, I thought it was my grandmother calling for me. I set my book down and called out, "Grandma." No answer. The whisper came again, this time clearer. My name, single quotes, single quotes. The sound sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't my grandmother's voice. It was softer, distant, almost hollow. I stood slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, and stepped into the hallway. The shadows seemed longer than usual, stretching unnaturally along the walls. At the far end of the hall, near the attic stairs, I saw it. A figure. It was just a shadow at first, barely more than a smudge of darkness in the dim light. But as I stared, it began to take shape. A tall, thin silhouette, standing completely still. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure didn't move. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or my eyes playing tricks on me. But then it tilted its head, just slightly, as though it were studying me. I stumbled back, my legs shaking, and blinked. When I opened my eyes, the figure was gone. I ran to my grandmother's room, my heart racing. I found her sitting up in bed, her expression calm but serious, as though she had been expecting me. "There's someone in the house," I stammered. She didn't ask me to explain. She didn't even look surprised. Instead, she reached for her cane and motioned for me to sit down. "You've seen it," she said, her voice quiet. I nodded, still trembling. "What was it?" she sighed, her hands gripping the edge of her blanket. "Not what, who. It's always been here, Kate, waiting." Her words sent a fresh wave of fear through me. I tried to protest, to tell her it wasn't possible, but deep down, I knew she was right. I had seen something and it wasn't human. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure at the end of the hallway. The way it had tilted its head, like it knew me, like it had been waiting for me. I told myself it was just a shadow, a trick of my imagination. But the house felt different after that. The whispers grew louder, no longer confined to the edges of my hearing. They seemed to follow me, weaving through the air like a song only I could hear. And the shadow, It wasn't just in the hallway anymore. I'd catch glimpses of it out of the corner of my eye in the living room, near the stairs, even in the mirror at the end of the hall. I wasn't just scared. I was being watched. And whatever was watching me, wanted something. I didn't tell my parents about what I'd seen. I didn't think they'd believe me. But my grandmother knew. One night, as we sat by the fire, she looked at me with a sadness I couldn't understand. "It's starting," she said softly. "You need to be ready, Kate, for what's coming." I didn't know what she meant then, but I would soon, because the figure wasn't just a shadow, it was a message, and the house was just beginning to speak. There's a moment when fear becomes certainty, when the things you've ignored, the things you've explained away, refuse to stay hidden. For me, that moment came in the stillness of a late autumn night, as I sat across from my grandmother, her eyes, sharp despite her age, locked onto mine. And she told me what I had always been too afraid to ask. She told me about the curse. My grandmother had always been a guarded woman. Her words were measured, her tone unwavering, and she rarely spoke about our family's past. But that night, something shifted. It was as though the weight of the house, of the history it carried, had finally pressed too hard on her shoulders. We were sitting by the fireplace, the room lit only by the flickering glow of the flames. I had just told her about the shadowy figure, about the way it seemed to know me. She listened in silence, her face unreadable. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and sighed. "It's time you knew," she said. "Time you understood what this family is living under." She began with a story I'd never heard before. A story about my great-great-grandfather, Charles Nelson. He had been a young man then, desperate and ambitious. The family farm was failing, the crops blighted by disease, and his wife and children were on the brink of starvation. One night, consumed by despair, he went into the forest behind the house. There he called out to whatever would listen, pleading for help, for salvation, and something answered. It wasn't human, my grandmother said, her voice low. It wasn't an angel, or a devil, or anything we could name. It was something older, something that doesn't belong in this world. The entity made him an offer, wealth and prosperity for his family, but at a price. His soul and the souls of his descendants. He agreed, she said, her eyes fixed on the fire. And that's how it began. My great-great-grandfather's bargain worked. The farm thrived, the family's fortune grew, and the Nelson name became respected in the town. But the price of the pact revealed itself soon enough. It didn't take him right away, my grandmother continued. That would have been too easy. It waited, watching him, letting him live with what he'd done. Then, when his time came, it claimed him, and with him, it claimed us. She explained that the pact wasn't just a one-time deal. The entity had tied itself to our bloodline, marking every descendant as part of the bargain. Each generation had to pay the price in one way or another. The whispers, the shadows, the figure you saw, their reminders, she said. It's always there, waiting for the right moment. I felt a chill run through me, colder than the autumn air outside. Why didn't you tell me this before? I asked. Because knowing doesn't change anything. She leaned forward then, her voice urgent. Listen to me, Kate. You need to be careful. It's stronger now, more active than it's been in years. That shadow you saw, it's not just a ghost, it's a messenger. A warning. A warning for what? A whisper. Her hand trembled as she reached for mine. That it's your turn. The words hit me like a blow. My turn. The weight of the curse wasn't just a story, it was real, and it was coming for me. I pulled my hand away, shaking my head. No, that can't be true. There has to be a way to stop it. She didn't answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but unyielding. There are no loopholes in a pact like this, she said. It's blood for blood, debt for debt. I left the room that night with more questions than answers, My grandmother's words echoing in my mind. It's your turn. I tried to sleep, but the house wouldn't let me. The whispers were louder, the shadows darker. And in the silence, I felt the presence, the thing my grandmother had described. It was waiting for me, and I was running out of time. Every family has its skeletons in the closet, but ours lived in the attic. My grandmother's warning had shaken me, but it was her story that truly terrified me. The Nelson family wasn't just haunted by memories or bad luck. We were cursed, bound to an ancient pact that none of us had chosen, but all of us had to pay for. And now the full weight of that curse was coming for me. After my grandmother told me about the pact, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still holding something back. Her words lingered in my mind, haunting me almost as much as the shadows in the house. It's your turn, she had said. But what did that mean? The next day, while my parents were at work and my grandmother was resting, I found myself drawn to the old family chest in her room. It was a heavy wooden trunk with brass fittings, and it had always been locked. But now, to my surprise, the lid creaked open without resistance. Inside, I found yellowed papers, faded photographs, and a leather-bound journal that looked as though it might crumble if I touched it. My hands trembled as I picked it up and flipped through the pages. It was my great-great-grandfather's journal. The journal was filled with careful, precise handwriting that grew messier and more erratic as the entries progressed. At first, Charles Nelson wrote about the struggles of his farm and the desperation that had driven him to seek help beyond the natural world. But then, I found the entry that changed everything. The spirit came to me in the woods, he had written. It was not of this world. Its eyes burned like fire, and its voice was the wind through the trees. I begged for its help, and it agreed, but not without a price. My soul, it said, and the souls of my kin. This wasn't just a story, it was a record, a confession. The entries that followed were even more chilling. Charles described how the spirit had granted him everything he had asked for. His crops flourished, his debts were paid, and his family was safe. But over time, he began to notice strange things. Shadows that moved without light. Whispers that came from nowhere. It watches, he wrote, and then, finally, I have made a terrible mistake. The price is too high. God forgive me. The journal's final pages were almost unreadable, the writing frantic and smeared with what looked like dried tears or something darker. Charles described how the spirit came for him, dragging him into the shadows. He begged for mercy, but the pact was unbreakable. I felt sick as I read the last line. My blood binds me, and my descendants will carry this burden. To them, I can only say, beware the attic. I slammed the journal shut, my hands shaking. The attic, the place my grandmother had forbidden me to enter, the place where the whispers always seemed loudest. I knew I should stay away, but something inside me stirred curiosity, fear, maybe even defiance. Whatever it was, I couldn't ignore it any longer. That night, as I sat in my room, I felt the weight of the house pressing down on me more than ever before. The air was thick, the shadows deeper. And then, just before midnight, I heard it. Soft knocks, they came from the ceiling directly above me. The attic. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, pretending I hadn't heard anything. But the knocking came again, louder this time. I stood slowly, my legs shaking, and made my way to the hallway. The attic door loomed at the end, its white paint almost glowing in the dim light. The air grew colder with each step I took, until I was standing directly beneath it. The whispers started then, faint and indistinct, like a dozen voices speaking over one another. My hand reached out almost on its own, and I touched the brass knob. It was ice cold, as I stood there, staring up at the attic door. I felt the truth of the curse settle over me, like a weight I could never lift. This wasn't just a story. This wasn't just history, the pact was alive, and it was waiting for me to open the door. The attic door loomed above me, silent and still, but the air around it was alive. I could feel it, a heaviness that pressed against my chest, a chill that seeped into my bones. I didn't open it that night. Something in me knew I wasn't ready, but from that moment on, the house seemed to change. It wasn't just the shadows or the whispers. It was the presence, and it was everywhere. In the days that followed, the whispers became harder to ignore. They weren't just faint murmurs anymore. They were clear, almost conversational. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, mocking, taunting. It was worst. At night, I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, and hear the voices weaving through the air, rising and falling like a terrible song. One night, as I lay there, I heard something new. Footsteps. They started faintly, just above me, in the attic. Slowly, methodically, they moved across the floorboards, each creak sending a jolt of fear through my body. I held my breath, clutching the blankets as though they could protect me. The footsteps stopped directly above my bed, and then the knocking came. 3 sharp, deliberate taps. It was my bedroom door. I didn't move. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure it would give me away. The knocking came again, louder this time, more insistent. Door was closed, just as I had left it, but as I stared, I saw it. A shadow. It stood just beyond the threshold, its outline barely visible in the dim light. It wasn't moving, but I could feel it watching me. I wanted to scream, to wake my parents, but the air around me felt heavy, like it was pressing against my throat. The shadow tilted its head, just as it had in the hallway, and then it was gone. When I finally opened the door, there was nothing there, but the floorboards creaked beneath my feet, as though something had just walked away. The next morning, the house felt different, brighter, maybe more normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow was still there, watching me. From the corners where the light didn't reach, I avoided the attic entirely. But that didn't stop the presence from following me. In the kitchen, I'd feel a cold breeze brush past me, even though the windows were closed. In the living room, the rocking chair swayed gently on its own, the rhythm slow and deliberate, and the whispers, they were always there, just below the edge of hearing. I started leaving the TV on just to drown them out, but even then, I could still feel them. One evening, I found my grandmother sitting in her chair by the fire, staring into the flames. She looked tired, older somehow, as though the weight of the curse was finally catching up to her. "It's getting stronger," she said without looking at me. I sat down beside her, my voice shaking. "What does it want?" She finally turned to face me, her blue eyes sharp despite her frailty. "You know what it wants," she said. "It's always the same. It wants what it was promised. But it's not fair," I said, tears welling in my eyes. "I didn't make the deal. I didn't agree to this." Her expression softened, and for the first time, I saw something I hadn't expected. Guilt. "None of us agreed," she said quietly. "But that doesn't matter. The pact doesn't care about fairness. It only cares about the blood." That night, as I lay in bed, I felt the house shift again. The air grew colder, and the whispers grew louder. They weren't mocking anymore. They were calling me. The attic door creaked open on its own, the sound echoing through the house. I wanted to stay in my room, to hide under the covers like I had so many times before. But something in me knew that wouldn't work anymore. I stood, my legs trembling, and walked to the hallway. The attic door was wide open, the darkness beyond it impenetrable. As I stared up at it, the whispers grew louder, coalescing into a single word. Kate. They were waiting for me, and I was out of time. I didn't go up to the attic that night. I wasn't ready, but I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. The presence in the house wasn't just haunting MIT, was demanding something, and soon I would have to face it. I couldn't sleep. Not after what I'd heard, what I'd seen. The whispers, the shadow, the attic, they were all connected. Part of something far older and darker than I could understand. I didn't have a choice anymore. If I wanted to survive, I had to find the truth. I had to understand the curse before it consumed me. The next morning, I waited until my parents left for work and my grandmother was napping. The house was quiet, almost peaceful, but I knew better. I started in the library, a small room at the back of the house that smelled of dust and old paper. It was filled with books that had belonged to my great-great-grandfather, most of them, about farming and local history. But tucked in the back corner of the top shelf, I found something different. It was a leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with cramped handwriting. My heart raced as I flipped through it, recognizing the same erratic script I'd seen in Charles Nelson's journal. This wasn't just a notebook, it was a record, a detailed account of every haunting, every shadow, every unexplained event that had plagued my family since the pact was made. The notebook described strange occurrences eerily similar to what I had experienced. Shadows in the hall, one entry read, whispers that call your name, cold spots that seem to follow you. Another entry, dated nearly 50 years ago, sent a chill down my spine. The attic door opened again last night. The whispers are growing louder. It won't be long now. As I read, a terrible realization dawned on me. The hauntings weren't random, they were warnings. The closer the pact came to claiming its next victim, the stronger the manifestations became. And now, it was my turn. The next entry mentioned something I hadn't heard before. An object hidden in the attic. The spirit is bound to this house, tied to the object that first called it here. The entry read, "As long as it remains, so does the curse." Stared at the words, my mind racing. If I could find this object, maybe I could stop the hauntings. Maybe I could break the curse. But the thought of going into the attic made my stomach churn. Still, I knew I couldn't ignore it. The answers I needed were up there, waiting in the darkness. Before I could gather the courage to go upstairs, I was stopped by my grandmother. She stood in the doorway of the library, her face pale and drawn. "You've been digging," she said, her voice low. I nodded, clutching the notebook to my chest. "I have to know the truth, Grandma. I have to find a way to stop this." Her eyes softened, but her voice was firm. "You think you can stop something like this? You think you can outsmart it?" She shook her head. "Charles tried. So did his sons and their sons after him. But it doesn't end, Kate. Something that ties it to us. If I can find it, maybe." "No," she interrupted, her voice sharp. "You don't understand. The attic isn't just where it begins, where it lives. If you go up there, you'll wake it." I wanted to believe her, to heed her warning, but how could I ignore what I'd found? If there was even a chance that I could break the curse, wasn't it worth the risk? I spent the rest of the day pacing the house, my mind a whirlwind of fear and determination. The notebook sat on the coffee table, its pages open to the final entry. The pact cannot be undone, but perhaps it can be contained. Contained, the word stuck in my mind like a thorn. Was it possible? Could I bind the spirit to something other than my family? There was only one way to find out. That night, as the whispers filled the house and the attic door creaked open once more, I stood at the base of the stairs, clutching a flashlight. My grandmother's voice echoed in my mind. "If you go up there, you'll wake it," but I couldn't run anymore. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding, and placed my foot on the first step. The attic had always been a forbidden place, a space filled with shadows and secrets. But as I climbed the creaking staircase that night, I couldn't ignore the pull any longer. The whispers grew louder with each step, weaving around me like a chorus of unseen voices. My flashlight flickered, its beam trembling as though the house itself was trying to push me back. But I couldn't stop. I had to face whatever was waiting for me. The attic was cold. the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and made your breath cloud in the air. Dust motes floated in the weak beam of my flashlight, and the faint smell of mildew clung to the air. The space was cluttered with forgotten relics, old trunks, broken furniture, and boxes stacked haphazardly against the walls. But my attention was drawn to the center of the room, where an old rocking chair sat motionless, its wood polished and gleaming despite the years. As I stepped closer, the whispers quieted, replaced by an oppressive silence that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The chair felt out of place, untouched by time. That's when I felt it, the presence, watching me. I froze as the air around me grew impossibly still. The beam of my flashlight wavered, and for a moment I thought it might go out entirely. Then I saw it, a figure standing just beyond the edge of the light. It was tall and thin, its shape barely more than a shadow, but its eyes glowed faintly to pinpricks of light that seemed to pierce straight through me. I tried to move, to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. The figure tilted its head, its movements slow and deliberate, as though it were studying me. "Kate," it said, its voice a low, guttural whisper that echoed in my mind. "You've come!" The shadow took a step closer, its form becoming clearer. It wasn't just a silhouette, it had features, sunken eyes, hollow cheeks, and hands that stretched into long, claw-like fingers. It wasn't just a shadow, it was human, or it had been once. I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible. The figure didn't answer right away. Instead, it gestured toward the rocking chair. As it moved, the chair began to sway, its creak filling the silence. "I am the cost," it finally said, "the debt unpaid." My chest tightened as its words sank in. This wasn't just a spirit. This was my great-great-grandfather, or what was left of him, the one who had made the pact, the one who had started it all. The spirit moved closer, and I felt the temperature drop even further. My flashlight flickered again, its beam barely cutting through the darkness. "You cannot break the pact," it said, its voice low and resonant. "It binds you, as it bound me, blood for blood, debt for debt." "There has to be a way," I said, my voice trembling. "A way to stop this." The spirit tilted its head again, almost mockingly. "There is no end," it said. "Only the price. You must pay it." Its words were like a blow, confirming what my grandmother had tried to tell me. The pact couldn't be undone. It was eternal, a curse woven into the fabric of my family's existence. I wanted to give in, to run, to accept that this was my fate, but something inside me rebelled. "You gave in, but I won't." The spirit's glowing eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw something else in its expression. Anger. "You think you are different," it said, its voice rising. "You are nothing but a shadow of me. The pact will claim you, as it claimed all before you." The rocking chair creaked faster, the air around me growing heavier, but I stood my ground, clutching the flashlight. "Like a lifeline, I won't let it," I said. "I'll fight it, even if it kills me." The spirit's laughter filled the attic, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You cannot fight what you do not understand," it said, "but you will try. And when you fail, I will be waiting." The light from my flashlight flared brightly for a moment, and when I blinked, the spirit was gone. I was alone in the attic, but the presence lingered, heavy and suffocating. I knew then that this was only the beginning. The pact wasn't just a curse, it was a battle, and I was about to enter the fight of my life. The attic had gone silent, but the spirit's words lingered in the air, carving themselves into my mind. "You cannot fight what you do not understand." I had thought the pact was just a curse, a shadow hanging over my family. But now I understood. It was something more. It was a contract, unbreakable and absolute, and the price it demanded was far greater than I had imagined. The next morning, I confronted my grandmother. The memory of the spirit's hollow eyes and chilling words burned in my mind. "You knew," I said, standing in the doorway of her room. She didn't look up from her knitting, her hands trembling slightly as she worked the needles. "Of course, I knew," she said. "It's my job to know, to prepare you." Her calmness infuriated me. "Prepare me for what?" I snapped. "For death, for losing everything, because of some stupid pact our ancestor made." She set the knitting down and finally looked at me, her blue eyes sharp. "Yes," she said simply. "That's exactly what I'm preparing you for." Her honesty left me reeling. I sank into the chair across from her, my anger giving way. To despair, there has to be a way to stop it. And promises like this can't be broken, only fulfilled. My grandmother began to tell me stories about the family members who had come before me. "Your great-uncle Henry," she said, her voice soft. "He was a kind man, always willing to help others. But when his time came, he fought it, tried to run. It didn't matter. The spirit claimed him anyway. And Aunt Margaret," she continued, "she thought she could bargain with it. Offered her wealth, her health, anything but her soul. But the spirit doesn't care about bargains. It only cares about what it's owed." Her words painted a grim picture. No one in our family had ever escaped the pact. They had all paid the price, she said, her voice trembling. "It's your turn." The weight of her words pressed down on me like a physical force. For the first time, I realized that the pact wasn't just about one life. It was about control over my family, over our choices, over our futures. In the days that followed, the spirit's presence grew stronger. It wasn't just the attic anymore, it was everywhere. I'd feel its gaze in the kitchen, its whispers in the living room, its cold touch on the back of my neck as I walked down the hall. One night I woke to the sound of my name being called. It was faint at first, but it grew, louder, more insistent. I opened my eyes to see the shadow standing at the foot of my bed. "The price must be paid," it said, its voice a low growl. I closed my eyes, willing it to go away, but when I opened them, it was still there, watching, waiting. I didn't sleep again that night. I spent hours poring over Charles Nelson's journal and the notebook I had found in the library, searching for some clue, some loophole. But the more I read, the more hopeless it seemed. The pact was clear. The spirit would claim what it was, owed, no bargains, no exceptions. Charles had written, "To break it, one must bear the weight of all links." I didn't fully understand what it meant, but it gave me a sliver of hope. If the pact was a chain, maybe there was a way to unbind it. But what would it cost me? My grandmother found me in the library, the journal open on the table in front of me. "You're thinking about fighting it?" she said, her voice heavy with resignation. I nodded. "I have to try." She placed a hand on my shoulder, her grip firm. "You don't understand what you're asking of yourself. The pact isn't just about one life, it's about all of us. Breaking it would mean taking on the burden of every soul it's ever claimed." Her words sent a chill through me. The weight of the pact wasn't just metaphorically, was real. And it would crush anyone who tried to shoulder it. But I couldn't accept that. Not yet. "I'd rather fight than let it take me without a fight," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. She sighed, her eyes filled with sadness. "Then you'd better prepare yourself. Because if you lose, it won't just take you, it'll take everything." I stared at the journal, the words blurring as tears filled my eyes. The spirit's whispers echoed in my mind, taunting me with the inevitability of the pact, but I couldn't give up. Not yet. If the pact demanded a price, I would find a way to pay it on my own terms, even if it meant facing the spirit head-on, because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about my family, about breaking the chains that had bound us for generations. I thought I had known fear, the whispers, but I was wrong. The spirit wasn't just haunting me anymore. It was breaking me. Piece by piece, it was unraveling my life, pulling me deeper into its grasp. And no matter where I went, I couldn't escape it. The house was no longer a home. It was a prison, a maze of shifting shadows and unnatural sounds. The whispers became relentless, their voices clearer and more insistent. They didn't just call my name anymore. They mocked me, taunted me, repeated fragments of my thoughts back to me in eerie, distorted tones. At night, the knocking came from all sides: the attic, the walls, even the floor beneath my bed. It felt like the spirit was closing in, surrounding me with no way out. And then there were the shadows. They weren't content to linger at the edges of my vision anymore. They moved openly, now, darting through the halls, lurking in doorways, standing at the foot of my bed. I wasn't just being watched, I was being hunted. I tried to escape the house, thinking maybe the spirit's reach ended at the property line. But I was wrong. The whispers followed me to work, their faint echoes weaving through the hum of the office. At the grocery store, I caught glimpses of shadows flitting between the aisles, vanishing when I turned to look. Even in my car, I couldn't escape. The rearview mirror reflected things that shouldn't have been there: dark shapes in the back seat, glowing eyes staring at me from the roadside. The spirit wasn't bound to the house. It was bound to me. It wasn't just me who was affected. The house seemed to be taking its toll on my family as well. My parents grew distant, their tempers flaring over the smallest things. They started arguing more, their voices sharp and biting. My dad, who had always been skeptical of the supernatural, began avoiding the attic entirely, refusing to even acknowledge its existence. My grandmother grew quieter, retreating to her room and refusing to come out. She looked frailer than ever, as though the weight of the curse was finally catching up to her. "It's getting stronger," she whispered one evening, her voice barely audible. "It knows your fear, Kate, and it's feeding on it." I tried everything I could think of to push the spirit back. I burned sage, sprinkled salt, even recited prayers I barely remembered from childhood. But nothing worked. One night, in desperation, I confronted the shadows directly. "What do you want from me?" I screamed, my voice echoing through the empty house. For a moment, there was silence. Then the air grew cold, and the shadows began to converge, pooling into a single, massive shape at the center of the room. "Your blood," it said, its voice a low growl. "Your soul. The price must be paid." I stumbled back, my heart racing. I had thought I could fight it, but in that moment I realized how outmatched I was. This wasn't just a spirit. It was something ancient, something powerful, and it wasn't going to let me go. The spirit's presence began to invade every aspect of my life. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think without feeling its weight pressing down on me. I started losing track of time, waking up in places I didn't remember going to. My dreams were filled with visions of the attic, of the rocking chair, of the spirit's glowing eyes watching me from the darkness. Even my reflection wasn't safe. The mirror at the end of the hallway became a source of dread, its surface seeming to ripple whenever I passed by. One night, I caught a glimpse of myself, but it wasn't me. The face staring back at me was hollow, twisted, its mouth curled into a cruel smile. I smashed the mirror, but it didn't matter. The damage was already done. I knew then that I couldn't keep running. The spirit wasn't going to stop, and the longer I waited, the stronger it became. If I wanted to survive, I had to face it. I had to go back to the attic. I had avoided the attic for as long as I could. The thought of going back up there, of facing the spirit again, made my stomach churn with fear. But I knew I couldn't avoid it anymore. The spirit wasn't going to let me run, and the hauntings were only getting worse. If I wanted any chance of breaking the curse, I had to confront it, no matter what it cost me. The attic door stood open, its dark maw yawning at the top of the narrow staircase. The air around it was colder than before, and the whispers were louder now. A constant hum of voices overlapping and weaving together like a sinister melody. I gripped the flashlight tightly, my palms slick with sweat, and placed my foot on the first step. The wood creaked beneath my weight, the sound echoing up the staircase. With each step, the air grew heavier, pressing against my chest like an invisible hand. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to keep climbing. When I reached the top, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the edge of the doorway. Beyond it was darkness, thick and impenetrable. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The attic was as I remembered it, cold, cluttered, and suffused with a suffocating sense of wrongness. But now it felt alive. The rocking chair sat in the center of the room, its wooden seat swaying back and forth as though moved by an unseen hand. The whispers grew louder, and then, all at once, they stopped. And that's when I saw it. The spirit was no longer just a shadow. It stood before me, tall and terrible, its hollow eyes burning with a faint, otherworldly light. Its form was skeletal, its limbs impossibly long, and its face was a twisted mockery of a human's. "You came," it said, its voice resonating like the rumble of distant thunder. "You were always meant to come." I fought the urge to run, planting my feet firmly on the attic's cold floor. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice trembling but defiant. The spirit tilted its head, its glowing eyes narrowing. "The pact must be fulfilled. You cannot escape it. Tell me how to end this." The spirit's laughter filled the attic, a sound so cold and hollow it made my skin crawl. "You cannot end what has already begun," it said. "You can only pay the price or let others pay it for you." My flashlight flickered as the spirit stepped back, its gaze shifting to the rocking chair. There, on the seat, lay a small, ornate box. "What is that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "The anchor," the spirit said. "The chain that binds me to this place." I took a cautious step closer, my heart pounding. The box was made of dark wood, its surface carved with intricate runes that seemed to shimmer in the dim light. "Destroy it," the spirit said, its voice softer now, almost ... pleading. "Destroy it, and the pact will be undone." But something about its tone made me hesitate. I glanced at the spirit, its hollow eyes watching me intently, and a terrible thought crossed my mind. "What happens if I destroy it?" I asked. I stared at the box, my mind racing. If I destroyed it, the curse might be broken. But the spirit's reaction made me wonder, what if it wasn't that simple? What if destroying the box released it instead of binding it? "You're lying," I said, turning to face the spirit. Its laughter filled the attic once more, cold and cruel. "You think you can outwit me?" it said. "You are nothing but a pawn, bound to the same fate as those before you. Destroy the anchor, or let the pact claim you. The choice is yours." Tears burned in my eyes as I gripped the box, its weight heavier than it should have been. The rocking chair stilled beneath it, the air around me charged with an electric tension. I thought of my grandmother's warning, of the notebook's final words. The pact is not just a curse, is a chain. Was breaking the box the key to breaking the chain? Or would it doom me and everyone else to something far worse? The spirit loomed over me, its voice low and insistent. "Decide," it said. "The price must be paid." My hands trembled as I lifted the box. The whispers in the attic grew louder, a cacophony of voices urging me forward, pulling me back, filling my mind with doubt. I had a choice to make, and I knew that no matter what I chose, nothing would ever be the same. The box was heavier than it looked, its carved runes glowing faintly in the flickering light of my flashlight. My hands trembled as I held it, the weight of the spirit's gaze pressing down on me. "Decide," it repeated, its voice a low, guttural growl. But how could I decide? Destroying the box might break the cursor. It might unleash something far worse. And the spirit wasn't about to tell me the truth. The spirit moved closer, its skeletal form looming over me. Its hollow eyes burned with a strange intensity, as though it could see straight into my soul. "This is what you've been searching for," it said, its voice almost soft now, coaxing. "The answer to your family's suffering. Break the box, and the pact will be undone." But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was lying. Its voice was too smooth, too eager. I thought of my grandmother's warning, of the journal's cryptic words. To break it, one must bear the weight of all links. "What happens if I destroy it?" I asked, my voice shaking. The spirit tilted its head, its silence stretching uncomfortably long. "Then, finally, the debt will end." But there was something in its tone, something that made my stomach twist with unease. Suddenly, the attic shifted. The walls seemed to dissolve, replaced by shadows that swirled and coalesced into shapes figures. I was no longer in the present before me. I saw a man kneeling in the forest, his hands clasped in desperate prayer. I recognized him immediately. From the old photographs, Charles Nelson, my great-grandfather. "Single quotes, please," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Save my family. I'll give you anything." And then the spirit appeared. It wasn't as I had seen it, a monstrous, skeletal figure, but something else entirely. It was beautiful and terrible, its glowing eyes filled with an otherworldly light. "I accept," it said, its voice like a melody that sent chills down my spine. The vision shifted again, showing Charles surrounded by prosperity, thriving crops, healthy children, a warm home. But the shadows grew longer around him, and the spirit's form began to loom behind him, always watching. "It gave him what he asked for," I whispered. "But it came with a cost." The scene changed once more. I saw Charles's final moments, his body frail, his eyes filled with terror as the spirit stood over him. "You were warned," it said. "The pact is eternal. Your blood will bind me, and your debt will never be paid." And then Charles was gone, consumed by the shadows. The vision shifted again, faster now, showing me flashes of the generations that followed. Each descendant lived under the spirit's watchful eye, their lives shaped by its influence, and each one, in turn, was claimed. "This is the price," the spirit said, its voice dragging me back to the present. "And now, it is your turn." I stumbled back, clutching the box to my chest. My mind raced as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The pact wasn't just about my family's souls, it was about control. The spirit had bound itself to our bloodline, feeding on our fear, our pain, our lives, and the box. The box wasn't just an anchor, it was a trap. Destroying it wouldn't free us, it would release the spirit entirely, unbinding it from our family and unleashing it on the world. "You knew?" I said, my voice trembling as I turned to face the spirit. "You knew I'd figure it out." The spirit's hollow eyes glimmered with amusement. "You are clever," it said, "but cleverness will not save you. The price must still be paid." I felt the weight of the box grow heavier, as though it were alive, pulsing with the spirit's energy. My hands shook as I realized the truth. There were only two options: destroy the box and release the spirit, condemning countless others to its wrath, or keep the box intact, ensuring the curse stayed with my family forever. My heart pounded as I thought of my grandmother, of the generations before me, who had suffered under the pact. Could I really continue to let my family bear this burden? But the alternative, leashing the spirit, was unthinkable. The spirit loomed closer, its voice low and insistent. "Decide," it said. "The price must be paid." I stared at the box, my vision blurring with tears. No matter what I chose, someone would pay, and I would have to live with the consequences. The attic was suffocating, the air heavy and cold, pressed down on me, as though the house itself were trying to crush me. The spirit's glowing eyes bore into mine, its voice echoing in my mind. "Decide," it said, the word reverberating. Like a drumbeat, I had the box in my hands, and with it, the weight of generations. There was no right choice, only the inevitable, and I was the one who had to make it. I knelt on the attic floor, the box resting in my lap. Its carved runes shimmered faintly, pulsing with the energy of the spirit's tether. My mind raced with the possibilities, each more horrifying than the last. Destroy the box, and the spirit would be free unleashed upon the world with nothing to stop it. Keep the box intact, and my family would remain cursed, bound to this endless cycle of suffering. I felt tears streak down my face as I thought of my grandmother, of the generations before me who had lived and died under the pact's shadow. And then I realized something. The spirit hadn't accounted for one thing: choice. The spirit's form shifted, its hollow eyes narrowing as though it could sense my hesitation. The attic grew darker, the shadows stretching and twisting like living things. "Choose," it roared, its voice shaking the walls. "The price must be paid." I gritted my teeth, clutching the box tighter. "You said the pact can't be undone," I said, my voice trembling. "But that doesn't mean I have to follow your rules." The spirit let out a guttural laugh, its form growing larger, more menacing. "You think you can defy me?" it said. "You are bound to me, as all before you were. There is no escape, but—" I wasn't listening anymore. I had made my decision. I stood, the box cradled in my arms, and stepped toward the rocking chair. The air around me seemed to thrum with energy, the whispers rising to a deafening crescendo. "I won't destroy it," I said, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through me. "But I won't let you have me, either." The spirit froze, its form flickering like a dying flame. "What are you doing?" it hissed. "I'm ending this," I said. Before I could hesitate, before I could second-guess myself, I placed the box on the chair and raised the ceremonial dagger I had found in the attic. The blade gleamed in the faint light, its edge sharp and cold. And to break it, someone has to bear the weight of all its links. The spirit's scream filled the attic, a sound so piercing it felt like it was tearing through my very soul. And then I plunged the dagger into the box. The moment the blade pierced the wood, the attic exploded with light. The runes on the box flared brightly, their energy surging outward like a wave. The rocking chair shattered, its pieces flying across the room, and the spirit let out one final agonized roar before its form dissolved into the light. I felt the energy rush through me, burning like fire and ice. The box's power, the weight of the pact, everything the spirit had held onto it, was all pouring into me. For a moment I thought I might die. My vision blurred, my breath caught in my throat, and the world around me seemed to spin out of control. But then, as quickly as it began, it was over. I collapsed to the floor, the attic silent and still. The box was gone, reduced to ashes, and the air felt lighter than it had in years. The spirit was gone. But as I sat there, trembling and gasping for breath, I realized something terrible. The pact wasn't broken. It had simply been transferred. I had taken the spirit's place. As I stood to leave the attic, I caught a glimpse of myself in the cracked mirror near the doorway. My reflection was ... different. My eyes glowed faintly, the same eerie light I had seen in the spirit's gaze. The whispers were gone, but I could feel something else, a presence, not outside me, but within. The pact was still intact. But now I was the one bound to it. The one who would bear its weight, its power, its curse. And as I stepped into the hallway, I realized the truth. I hadn't broken the cycle. I had only become part of it. The house was quiet now, its shadows still, and its whispers silent. But I knew the peace wouldn't last, because now I was the keeper of the pact, and soon it would be someone else's turn to pay the price. The house was still for the first time in my life. No whispers, no knocking, no shadows lurking in the corners. The spirit was gone, but the silence wasn't comforting. It was heavy, ominous, because I knew what it meant. The pact hadn't ended. It had only changed hands, and now it was mine to bear. The days that followed felt surreal. My grandmother watched me carefully, her sharp eyes studying me as though searching for cracks in my resolve. "You did it," she said one evening, her voice a mixture of relief and sorrow. "You stopped it for now." I wanted to believe her, but the weight in my chest told me otherwise. The curse was still alive. I could feel it coiled deep within me, waiting. It whispered to me in my dreams, showing me glimpses of futures I couldn't fully understand. A family I didn't recognize, faces distorted by fear, the echoes of the spirit's voice, low and mocking. It never ends. Chestnut Hollow seemed untouched by what had happened. The fields grew green, the townsfolk carried on with their lives, and the house on the hill sat quiet and unassuming. No one knew about the pact or the price that had been paid to protect them, and they never would. But as I walked through the town, I couldn't help but wonder how many of their lives had been shaped by the curse without them even realizing it. How many of their blessings had come at the expense of my family's suffering. The first time I felt its pull, I was alone in the attic, sifting through the remains of the shattered box. The rocking chair was gone, reduced to splinters, but the air in the room still felt charged, heavy with the remnants of the spirit's energy. That's when I saw it. A single shard of the box, its surface etched with faint runes that glowed softly in the dim light. As I picked it up, a cold shiver ran through me. The whispers returned, faint and distant, like a memory resurfacing. "It's not over," I murmured, clutching the shard tightly. "It's never over." My parents didn't ask questions. They never had, and now I understood why. "The less you knew about the curse," she said one night, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire. "I should have told you everything sooner, but I thought, I hoped." ... Single quotes her words trailed off, and she shook her head. "It doesn't matter now. You've taken on the burden, and for that, I'm so sorry." I wanted to comfort her, to tell her it wasn't her fault, but the words felt hollow. She had been trying to protect me, just as her mother had tried to protect her, but the curse didn't care about good intentions. The house didn't haunt me the way it had before. There were no shadows, no voices, no cold spots. But it was far from peaceful. I could feel the curse watching me, waiting for the moment it would awaken again. And I knew that when it did, I would have to make the same impossible choice I had faced in the attic. I had become the spirit's keeper, the one tasked with ensuring the pact remained intact. But I wasn't the only one who would suffer. I thought of my future children, of the generations yet to come, and my heart ached with the weight of it all. The curse wasn't just a chain, it was a legacy. One night, as I stood at the edge of the woods where my great-great-grandfather had first made the pact, I felt the spirit's presence stir. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying a voice I hadn't heard since the night. "In the attic you are mine," it said, its tone quiet but resolute. "And one day, they will be too." I clenched my fists, my breath hitching in my throat. I wanted to scream, to fight, to deny its words, but deep down, I knew the truth. The spirit wasn't gone. It was part of me now, and it always would be. As I turned back toward the house, the shadows of the trees stretched long across the ground, their shapes flickering like ghosts. The curse wasn't just a story. It wasn't just a haunting. It was alive, and somewhere in the distance, a faint mocking whisper echoed through the night.
The air buzzed with laughter and distant chatter as families weaved through rows of vendors under the warm glow of the autumn sun. Emily Thompson tugged on her mother's sleeve, her eyes wide with excitement. "Mom, look, over there," she said, pointing toward a stall tucked into the farthest corner of the flea market. Unlike the others, this one seemed shrouded in shadow despite the bright day. Its mismatched collection of antiques and oddities gave it a curious, unsettling charm. Emily darted ahead, drawn to something she couldn't yet see, her family trailing behind. "Emily, wait." Her mother, Laura, called, quickening her pace. Emily stopped abruptly in front of a large, ornate mirror. Its gilded frame was etched with curling vines and strange faces, some human, some not, that seemed to stare back at her. She reached out to touch the smooth, dark glass, her reflection shimmering faintly in the dim light. "I love it," she whispered, a smile spreading across her face. A raspy voice broke the moment. "It's not for everyone," the vendor said, stepping out from behind the cluttered table. He was a wiry man with hollow cheeks and piercing gray eyes that seemed to bore into Laura as she approached. His voice carried a weight that made her uneasy. But Emily didn't seem to notice. "It's beautiful," Emily said, her gaze never leaving the mirror. "How much?" The vendor chuckled, his lips curling into a faint, knowing smile. "Are you sure about this, little miss?" he asked. "This isn't just any mirror. It has a way of changing things." Tom, Emily's father, joined them, frowning. "What's that supposed to mean?" The vendor shrugged. "Some things are better left unsaid," he replied cryptically. "But if you really want it, I'll let it go for 50. 50. Tom scoffed. "For an old mirror." "It's not old," Emily interjected, her voice firm. "It's special. Please, Dad. Please, can we get it?" Laura hesitated, exchanging a glance with Tom. The vendor's unsettling demeanor didn't help, but Emily's pleading eyes were impossible to resist. "Fine," Tom sighed, pulling out his wallet. "But don't blame me if it falls apart." The vendor handed them the mirror carefully, his expression somber. "Good luck," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The drive home was uneventful, though Emily couldn't stop staring at the mirror, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings on its frame. Peter, her 16-year-old brother, rolled his eyes. "It's just a mirror," he muttered, slouching in his seat. "You're acting like it's some kind of treasure." Emily ignored him, her excitement unshaken. When they arrived home, the family debated where to hang the mirror. Laura finally decided on the upstairs hallway, directly across from Emily's bedroom. "It catches the light perfectly," she said, stepping back to admire it. But as the family went about their evening, the mirror seemed to take on a presence of its own. The hallway grew unusually quiet, the air heavier than usual. That night, Emily lay in bed, staring at the mirror through her open door. Its dark surface seemed to absorb the faint light from the hallway, making the shadows around it appear sharper. As she drifted off to sleep, she thought she saw movement, just a flicker in the corner of the mirror. She sat up quickly, her heart racing, but it was just her reflection staring back at her, still and silent. "Just my imagination," she muttered, pulling the covers over her head. Down the hall, Laura passed the mirror on her way to bed. She paused, feeling a sudden chill that made her shiver. She glanced at her reflection, but there was nothing unusual. "Get a grip," she whispered to herself, shaking her head. The house fell silent as the family slept, but the mirror remained awake. Its dark surface shimmered faintly, the carved faces along its frame seeming to shift ever so slightly in the dim moonlight. From deep within the glass came a soft, almost imperceptible sound, a faint tap, 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 as though something on the other side was waiting to be let out. The Thompson household was a picture of normalcy the following morning. Tom sipped his coffee. Peter scrolled through his phone, and Laura packed lunches at the counter. But upstairs, Emily stood in the hallway, her gaze locked on the antique mirror. It seemed different today. The surface was too dark, the reflection unnaturally sharp, as though the mirror held more detail than it should. Emily tilted her head, and her reflection did the same, but something about the movement was off. A fraction too slow. Her heart raced. "Emily," Laura called from downstairs. "Come eat breakfast." Emily blinked and turned, but before she walked away, she could have sworn she saw her reflection linger, just for a moment, before following. Over the next few days, Emily found herself drawn to the mirror. At first, it was curiosity's ornate frame, the way it caught the light, and how her reflection seemed so alive. But soon, the fascination turned to unease. The movements of her reflection didn't always match her own. Sometimes, when she leaned closer, the reflection's lips curled into a faint smile. Even though she wasn't smiling. She didn't say anything to her family at first, afraid they'd think she was imagining things. Downstairs, Laura felt her own discomfort growing. Late at night, when the house was quiet, she heard faint whispers as she walked past the mirror. The words were too soft to make out, but the tone was unsettling, like a conversation she wasn't meant to hear. Tom brushed it off. "Old mirrors can do weird things with light and sound," he said, trying to reassure her. "It's nothing." But even Tom began to feel it, a cold draft that seemed to radiate from the mirror, no matter how warm the house was. One afternoon, Peter stood in front of the mirror, checking his hair before heading out to meet friends. He adjusted his shirt, glanced at his phone, then back at the mirror. His reflection stared back, perfectly still. Peter frowned. He hadn't stopped moving. Why had his reflection? He waved a hand slowly, and after a pause, his reflection waved back, its movements just slightly off. "Whoa," Peter muttered, stepping back. He rubbed his eyes and looked again, but everything appeared normal now. Shaking his head, he muttered, "I really need to get more sleep." By the end of the week, the whole family had started to notice the mirror's presence. It wasn't just a piece of furniture anymore, it felt alive. Its dark surface almost pulsating with quiet energy. Tom avoided walking past it entirely, finding excuses to take the longer route through the downstairs hallway. Laura found herself checking her reflection more often, as though making sure it still matched. Emily, however, was both terrified and fascinated. Late one night, she sat in her room, staring at the mirror through her open door. Her reflection sat in the glass, mirroring her position perfectly. But as Emily shifted, leaning closer to the door, her reflection didn't move. "Hello," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Her reflection tilted its head. Emily froze, her breath caught in her throat. For a moment, the reflection's lips parted, and she thought she heard it whisper her name. "Emily, .. She slammed her door shut, her heart pounding as she backed away. But the faint sound of her name lingered, echoing in the quiet. From the hallway, the mirror seemed to shimmer in the dark, its frame catching the faint glow of moonlight. The house seemed different now, as though the mirror had infected its very walls with its oppressive presence. The usual warmth of their home felt distant, replaced by an inexplicable tension that no one dared to address. Late at night, Laura tiptoed through the hallway, careful not to look directly at the mirror. But as she passed, a faint, breathy whisper drifted through the air. Double quotes, "Stay, .. Laura froze, her heart pounding. Slowly, she turned toward the mirror, but her reflection stared back, motionless and innocent. "It's just in my head," she whispered to herself, though she wasn't convinced. Peter was the first to openly complain. "There's something wrong with that mirror," he said. Sitting on the living room couch with his arms crossed, Tom glanced up from his laptop. "It's just a mirror, Pete." "No, it's not," Peter insisted. "I saw my reflection wave at me yesterday when I wasn't moving." Tom chuckled, but it was a strange sound. "You probably just need some sleep. You've been staying up too late playing video games." Peter scowled. "I know what I saw." From the kitchen, Emily peeked around the corner, her wide eyes fixed on her brother. "I believe you," she said quietly. Peter looked at her, his expression softening. "You do," Emily nodded. "It's done that to me too." As days turned into nights, the family began to avoid the hallway entirely. They found excuses to use the downstairs bathroom instead of the one upstairs, or to take the longer route through the living room to reach their bedrooms. But avoiding the mirror wasn't enough to escape its presence. Laura started hearing whispers in other parts of the house, soft, fleeting sounds that seemed to call her name. Tom complained about cold drafts. No matter how high they turned up the thermostat. Emily woke one night to find her door slightly ajar, the mirror visible from her bed. She swore she saw someone or something standing in front of it, staring into her room. When she blinked, the figure was gone. One evening, Laura called everyone into the living room. "We need to talk about the mirror," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Tom sighed. "This again. It's just an old mirror, Laura. We've been letting it get into our heads." "It's not in my head," Peter said sharply. "Something's wrong with it. I see things, my reflection moving when I don't." "And the whispers," Laura added. "You've heard them too, haven't you, Tom?" Tom hesitated, avoiding her gaze. "What about you, Emily?" Laura asked gently. Emily clutched her stuffed rabbit, her eyes wide. "I think it's watching us," she whispered. A heavy silence fell over the room. That night, as the family slept, the mirror stood quietly in the hallway, its dark surface absorbing what little light remained. The carved faces on its frame seemed sharper in the moonlight, their expressions more menacing, and in the silence, a faint tapping began. Tap, dot 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 dot. Tap, dot dot dot. Tap, dot dot dot. From behind the glass, a shadow moved, its shape just barely visible in the shimmering darkness. Downstairs, Emily stirred in her sleep, a cold breeze brushing her cheek. She opened her eyes slowly, her gaze drifting toward her open bedroom door. In the hallway, the mirror seemed to glow faintly, its surface rippling like disturbed water. Double quotes. "Emily, a voice whispered, soft and childlike. Emily pulled the covers over her head, squeezing her eyes shut as the tapping grew louder. The tapping came again, steady and deliberate, as though someone or something was knocking from inside the mirror. Emily sat up in bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit tightly. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The sound stopped abruptly, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. For a moment, she thought she'd imagined it. But then, from the hallway, a soft, childlike voice drifted through the darkness. "Emily, come play, Summoning her courage, Emily slid out of bed and tiptoed toward her door. The hallway was dimly lit by the faint glow of the moonlight filtering through the upstairs window. But the mirror seemed to absorb the light, its surface darker than ever. The voice came again, faint but clear. "Emily, Her heart pounded as she approached the mirror. It looked normal, just a reflection of the empty hallway. But as she leaned closer, she felt the faintest breath of cold air against her skin. "Emily, come closer," the voice whispered, barely audible. She froze, her hand hovering inches from the glass. Suddenly, A shadow flickered across the mirror, and Emily stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat. "No," she cried, spinning around and running to her parents' room. She burst through the door, tears streaming down her face. "Mom! Dad! There's something in the mirror!" Tom groaned, sitting up groggily. "Emily, it's the middle of the night. What are you talking about?" Laura was already on her feet, her expression alarmed. "What happened? It was talking to me," Emily said, clutching her rabbit. "It said my name. It wanted me to come closer." Laura exchanged a worried glance with Tom. "Let's check it out," she said, grabbing a flashlight. The three of them walked into the hallway, the silence almost suffocating. Laura shone the flashlight on the mirror, its beam cutting through the darkness. The reflection looked ordinary, just the hallway, empty and still. "There's nothing there, Emily," Tom said, though his voice lacked conviction. Laura stepped closer, her breath fogging the glass. The air around the mirror was cold and naturally so. "I don't like this," she murmured, pulling Emily close. "Maybe we should move it to the garage tomorrow." "No," Emily said quickly. "I don't want to touch it. Please don't touch it." The next morning, Laura insisted on moving the mirror. "We can't keep it here," she said. "Not if it's scaring Emily like this." Tom hesitated, glancing at the mirror. "It's just a mirror," he said, though his tone was uncertain. "Maybe we're all overreacting." "I'm not overreacting," Laura snapped. "Something's wrong with it." Peter, who had been listening from the kitchen, chimed in. "Mom's right. That thing's creepy. We should just get rid of it." Emily shook her head. "You can't get rid of it," she said softly. "It won't let you." That afternoon, Tom tried to lift the mirror from its hooks, but it wouldn't budge. It felt impossibly heavy, as though the wall itself were holding it in place. "That's weird," he muttered, straining against the weight. "It wasn't this heavy when we brought it home." "Leave it," Emily said from the doorway, her voice trembling. Tom turned to her, wiping sweat from his brow. "We can't leave it here. Not if it's scaring you." "You don't understand," Emily said, her eyes wide. "It doesn't want to move. If you try, it'll get angry." That night, Laura woke to the sound of faint whispers. She sat up in bed, her skin prickling. The whispers weren't coming from the hallway, they were in the room. Her gaze drifted toward the vanity mirror in the corner. Its surface shimmered faintly, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw her reflection smile at her. "Tom," she whispered, shaking him awake. He groaned, sitting up. "What is it now?" "Something's wrong," she said, pointing to the vanity. They both stared at the mirror, but it looked normal now. "It's just in your head," Tom muttered, lying back down, but Laura couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Down the hall, Emily sat awake in her bed, staring at her closed door. From the other side, she heard it again, the soft tapping, growing louder and more insistent. "Emily, ... The voice whispered, sending chills down her spine. The mirror glimmered faintly, its surface rippling as though something inside was pressing against it, trying to break through. The Thompson family sat around the kitchen table, the atmosphere heavy with tension. The events of the previous night lingered in the air like a storm cloud, unspoken but impossible to ignore. "We need answers," Laura said finally, breaking the silence. "We can't keep living like this." "What kind of answers?" Tom asked, rubbing his temples. "The mirror," Laura replied firmly. "We need to find out where it came from. There has to be an explanation." Across the table, Emily sat quietly, her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly in her lap. "It doesn't want you to know," she said softly. Laura started her search with the flea market vendor. She dialed the number, scribbled on the receipt, her fingers trembling slightly. The phone rang several times before a recorded message played. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Frowning, she tried again, only to be met with the same result. Of course, she muttered, tossing the phone onto the counter. Maybe it's better if we don't know, Tom said from the doorway, his voice cautious. No, Laura snapped. If we don't figure this out, whatever's happening with that mirror is only going to get worse. Determined, Laura turned to the local library, combing through archives and old newspapers. She found little at first, just obscure articles about local antiques and their histories. But then, in an old binder tucked away in the back, she found it. A grainy black and white photo of the mirror. The caption read, "Estate Sale, Personal Effects of Marion Holloway." The name sent a chill down her spine. Flipping through the accompanying article, Laura learned that Marion Holloway was a reclusive woman who had lived in a nearby manor decades ago. Rumors swirled about her practicing dark rituals, though no concrete evidence had ever been found. The mirror, it was said, was one of her most prized possessions. That evening, Laura shared what she'd learned with Tom and the kids. "It's just a story," Tom said dismissively. "People love to make up creepy legends about old stuff like this." "What about the rituals?" Peter asked, leaning forward. "What if they're true?" Laura hesitated. The article mentioned that Marion believed the mirror was a doorway, but it didn't say to where. Emily spoke up, her voice trembling. "I think I know." Everyone turned to her, their expressions a mix of confusion and fear. "It's not just a mirror," Emily said, clutching her rabbit tightly. "It's alive." Emily's words hung in the air, sending a chill through the room. "Sweetheart," Laura began gently, "what do you mean by alive?" "It's not just a doorway," Emily whispered. "It's a person. Or, it was." "What are you talking about?" Peter asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Emily looked at him, her eyes wide and frightened. "There's someone in there," she said. "I can feel her watching me." Laura's stomach churned. "Who?" Emily hesitated, then whispered, "The lady from the story." That night, Laura sat in her bedroom, staring at her laptop. She couldn't stop thinking about the mirror, its dark surface, the strange occurrences, Emily's haunting words. She found herself searching for more information about Marion Holloway. Most of what she found was speculation, tales of sacrifices, and the mirror's supposed ability to trap souls. One account stood out. The mirror reflects not just our image, but the darkest parts of ourselves. Beware prolonged exposure, as it may lead to entrapment. Laura shivered, closing the laptop. She glanced at the vanity mirror across the room and froze. Her reflection was smiling. Laura hurried into the hallway, her heart racing. She found Tom near the mirror, staring at it with an odd expression. "Tom?" she asked cautiously. He turned slowly, his face pale. "I heard her," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Laura's blood ran cold. "What do you mean, the woman?" Tom replied, nodding toward the mirror. "She called my name." Laura grabbed his arm, pulling him away from the mirror. "We need to do something," she said urgently. "But what?" Tom asked, his voice trembling. From the top of the stairs, Emily's voice broke the tension. "She doesn't want you to stop her," she said. Laura turned, her breath catching as she saw Emily standing in the hallway, her eyes fixed on the mirror. "She's angry," Emily whispered, "and she's not going to let us go." Behind her, the mirror rippled faintly, its surface shimmering like disturbed water. The tapping was louder now, more insistent, echoing through the darkened hallway like a heartbeat. Emily lay in bed, wide-eyed, clutching her stuffed rabbit to her chest. Double quotes, "Emily, ... The voice called, soft and melodic. yet tinged with something sinister. Her gaze drifted toward the mirror visible through her open door. The glass rippled faintly, like water disturbed by an invisible hand. "Come closer, dot dot dot." Despite her fear, Emily found herself drawn to the sound. Her feet touched the cold floor, and she crept toward the door, her movements hesitant. The hallway was bathed in the dim glow of moonlight, but the mirror seemed darker than ever, its surface swallowing the light. "Who are you?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling. The answer came, faint but clear. "I'm your friend, come play." Emily's hand reached out instinctively, her fingers brushing the icy surface of the mirror. The glass rippled at her touch, sending a chill up her spine. "Emily, stop!" The shout came from behind her. Emily spun around to see Laura standing at the end of the hallway, her face pale with fear. Tom and Peter appeared moments later, drawn by Laura's cry. "What's going on?" Tom asked, his voice tense. "It's her," Emily said, pointing at the mirror. "She's inside. She wants me to come in." Tom frowned, stepping toward the mirror. "This has gone far enough," he muttered, reaching out to touch the frame. "Don't!" Laura screamed. But it was too late. As Tom's fingers brushed the mirror, the glass rippled violently. A wave of icy air blasted through the hallway, extinguishing the faint light from the upstairs window. Tom stumbled back, his breath visible in the freezing air. "She's waking up," Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. The family stared in horror as the surface of the mirror began to shift. Shadows writhed within the glass, forming shapes that were almost human, but grotesquely distorted. One of the shapes stepped forward, its face pressed against the glass. It was Emily's reflection, but its eyes were hollow, and its lips curled into a cruel smile. "Let me out," it whispered, the words muffled but clear. "That's not me," Emily said, tears streaming down her face. "It's not me." The reflection moved again, raising its hand to the glass. Its voice grew louder, more insistent. "Let me out." Before anyone could react, the mirror erupted with light, blinding the family. Emily screamed as she was pulled toward the glass, her feet leaving the floor. "Emily!" Laura shouted, grabbing her daughter's arm. But it was like trying to hold on to smoke. Emily's body passed through the glass, as though it were water, disappearing into the darkness beyond. The reflection of Emily stepped out, its movements too smooth, too perfect. It turned to face the family, its eyes glowing faintly. "She's fine," it said, its voice sweet and calm. But the real Emily appeared on the other side of the glass, pounding against it with her fists. "Mommy, help me," she cried, her voice muffled and distant. Laura and Peter rushed toward the mirror, but the imposter, Emily, stepped in front of them, blocking their path. "You don't need to worry," it said, its smile widening. "I'll take good care of you." Tom stared at the reflection inside the mirror, his face pale. "What do you want from us?" he asked, his voice shaking. The imposter tilted its head. "Nothing. Yet," it replied. Laura grabbed a heavy candlestick from a nearby table, her hands trembling. "Give her back," she screamed, swinging the candlestick at the mirror. The glass shattered with an ear-splitting crash, shards flying in every direction. For a moment, the hallway was silent. The mirror lay in pieces on the floor, its ornate frame cracked and splintered. Laura dropped the candlestick, her chest heaving as she searched the shards for any sign of Emily. "Where is she?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. But the shards of glass didn't reflect the hallway or the family. Instead, they showed something else, a dark, endless void, filled with faint whispers and shifting shadows. From one of the larger shards, Emily's face appeared, her expression filled with fear. "Mommy!" she said softly, her voice echoing faintly. She's still here. The shards of the mirror began to glow faintly, and the whispers grew louder, overlapping into a chaotic cacophony. The imposter, Emily, now standing at the end of the hallway, turned to face them, its eyes narrowing. "You shouldn't have done that," it said, its voice colder now. And then, the lights in the house went out. The Thompson family huddled in the darkened hallway, their breaths shallow and their eyes fixed on the figure at the far end. The imposter, Emily, stood perfectly still, her faintly glowing eyes the only source of light. "Where's Emily?" Laura demanded, her voice trembling but firm. The imposter tilted its head, the movement unnervingly fluid. "She's safe," it said, its tone syrupy sweet. "You don't need to worry about her anymore." Peter took a step forward, gripping a shard of the shattered mirror. "You're not her," he said through gritted teeth. The imposter smiled. "Aren't I?" The family backed into the living room, desperate to put distance between themselves and the unsettling figure. The imposter followed slowly, its steps silent, its gaze unblinking. "Stay back," Tom shouted, grabbing a fireplace poker. The imposter stopped, its smile widening. "You're scared of me," it said, almost teasingly. "But you don't need to be. I'm part of her now." "You're not her," Laura said, her voice shaking with emotion. "You're just a thing pretending to be her." The imposter's expression darkened. "I'm more her than she is now," it said. "And soon, you'll see why that's better." As the family tried to regroup, strange things began to happen. The shards of the shattered mirror scattered across the hallway floor started to glow faintly, their surfaces shimmering with distorted images. "Look," Peter whispered, pointing to one of the larger shards. Inside the glass, Emily's face appeared, her expression filled with terror. She mouthed the words, "Help me." "She's still in there," Laura said, her voice breaking. "We have to get her out." But the imposter stepped closer, its glowing eyes narrowing. "You can't," it said flatly. "She's where she belongs." The house grew colder with each passing moment, the air thick with an oppressive energy. The imposter raised its hand, and the shards of glass began to tremble. "They're mine now," it said, its voice echoing unnaturally. The shards lifted off the ground, spinning slowly in the air. One by one, they fused back into the ornate frame of the mirror, which seemed to repair itself as if time were rewinding. Laura stared in horror as the mirror reformed, its surface darker than before, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. "No," she whispered, stepping back. "Yes," the imposter replied, its smile returning. The family watched helplessly as the mirror stood whole once again, its frame gleaming in the dim light. From within the glass, Emily's reflection appeared, her small hands pressed against the surface. "She's trapped," Laura said, tears streaming down her face. "We have to break it again." Peter grabbed a chair, raising it high above his head. But before he could strike, the imposter lunged forward, grabbing his wrist with unnatural strength. "Don't touch it," the imposter hissed, its voice layered with a deep, guttural growl. Peter froze, his eyes wide with fear. "Let him go," Tom shouted, swinging the fireplace poker. The imposter released Peter and stepped back, its glowing eyes narrowing. "You're making a mistake," it said. "No. The mistake was bringing that thing into our house," Tom shouted, pointing at the mirror. The imposter laughed softly. "It doesn't matter where you go. She'll always be with you." Laura grabbed Peter's arm and pulled him back. "We need to regroup," she said. "Now." As the family retreated toward the kitchen, the imposter stood in the hallway, its gaze fixed on them. "You can't run from this," it said. "You belong to her now." In the kitchen, the family huddled around the table, their breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. "What do we do?" Peter asked, his voice trembling. "That thing isn't going to let us go. We need to destroy the mirror," Laura said. "Completely this time." "And how are we supposed to do that?" Tom asked, frustration and fear mingling in his tone. Laura hesitated, then glanced toward the hallway. "I don't know, but we have to try." Emily's faint voice echoed from the mirror, her cry muffled and distant. "Mommy, ... help me, ... The house began to change around them. The lights flickered, and the walls seemed to pulse, as though the building itself were alive. The oppressive cold seeped into every room, and the whispers returned, louder and more chaotic. "We don't have much time," Laura said, her voice shaking. "Whatever that thing is, it's getting stronger." Tom grabbed the journal they had found earlier, flipping through its fragile pages. "There has to be something in here," he muttered. "Some way to stop it." Peter glanced toward the hallway, where the imposter stood motionless, its glowing eyes visible even in the dark. "It's watching us," he whispered. As the family frantically searched for answers, the imposter spoke, its voice echoing through the house. "You'll never save her," it said, its tone almost mocking. "She's mine now." From the hallway, the mirror began to ripple again, its surface glowing faintly, as Emily's distorted reflection pressed against the glass, her cries growing louder. "Help me!" she screamed, her voice breaking. Laura clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. "We're going to get her back," she said, but the imposter only smiled. The Thompson family sat in the dimly lit kitchen, the air heavy with fear. From the hallway, the mirror pulsed faintly, its surface shimmering like water in the moonlight. Emily's muffled cries echoed faintly, each one piercing Laura's heart like a knife. "She's getting weaker," Laura whispered, her hands trembling as she flipped through the journal. "We don't have much time." "And that thing," Peter said, glancing nervously toward the hallway. "It's not going to let us do anything." "It's not Emily," Tom said firmly, gripping the fireplace poker. "Whatever it is, it's using her to keep us here." From the hallway came the imposter's soft, lilting voice. "Why are you hiding? Come play with me, ... Laura ran her fingers over the journal's crumbling pages, her eyes scanning for anything that could help. "It says the mirror feeds on fear and despair," she murmured. "It draws strength from us, ... from our emotions." "Great," Peter muttered. "We're like batteries for this thing." Laura ignored him, her finger landing on a passage near the bottom of the page. "But it also says the mirror's connection to the real world can be severed. If we destroy its heart, we can break its hold." "What's the heart?" Tom asked, leaning over her shoulder. Laura hesitated. "The ritual says it's at the center of the mirror's power, a part of it hidden from sight." The lights flickered violently, and a deep groan echoed through the house, as though the walls themselves were alive. "She knows what we're doing," Peter said, his voice shaking. The imposter's laughter drifted through the hallway, soft and mocking. "You can't win," it said. Tom stood, gripping the poker tightly. "We're not just going to sit here and let it win," he said. "We're getting Emily back, no matter what." As the family stood to move, the kitchen door slammed shut with a deafening crack, trapping them inside. "Mom!" Emily's muffled voice called from the hallway. "Help me!" The room plunged into darkness, the faint glow of the mirror the only light visible. Shadows began to move across the walls, their shapes jagged and unnatural. "We need to get out of here," Peter said, his voice trembling. Laura grabbed a shard of glass from the broken mirror on the floor. "We'll use this," she said, holding it up. "Why?" Tom asked, frowning. "The journal says pieces of the mirror can weaken its power," Laura explained. If we carry it with us, it might protect us long enough to destroy the heart. The door creaked open slowly, and the imposter's voice echoed from the hallway. Come closer, it whispered. She's waiting for you. The family moved cautiously into the hallway, the oppressive cold pressing against them like a physical weight. The imposter stood at the far end, its glowing eyes fixed on them. Peter gripped the shard of glass tightly, its edges cutting into his palm. Stay together, he whispered, as they moved past the mirror. Its surface rippled violently, and Emily's reflection appeared again, her hands pounding desperately against the glass. Don't leave me, she cried, her voice breaking. Laura reached for her instinctively, but Tom pulled her back. It's not real, he said. It's trying to distract you. It's her. Laura insisted, tears streaming down her face. She's right there. The imposter's laughter filled the hallway, louder now, almost deafening. She's mine, it said. You'll never take her back. The family followed the journal's instructions, making their way to the center of the house, where the mirror's power was said to be strongest. They entered a small, circular room they had never seen before. Its walls were covered in symbols, and in the center stood a pedestal, holding a shard of glass, larger and darker than any they had seen. The heart, Laura whispered, her breath fogging in the icy air. The mirror's surface rippled, and the imposter stepped into the room, its movements slow and deliberate. Don't touch it, it said, its voice cold. Tom stepped forward, gripping the poker tightly. Get out of our way, he growled. The imposter tilted its head, smiling faintly. Make me. The room erupted into chaos as the imposter lunged at Tom, its movements unnaturally fast. Shadows surged from the walls, their shapes clawing at the family. Break the heart, Laura screamed, shoving Peter toward the pedestal. Peter raised the shard of glass, but the imposter grabbed his arm, its grip like iron. He cried out, struggling against its strength. Let him go, Laura shouted, slamming the shard into the imposter's back. The creature shrieked, its glowing eyes dimming as it stumbled backward. Peter broke free, the shard clattering to the floor. Do it now, Tom shouted. Peter grabbed the shard from the pedestal and raised it high above his head. The mirror's surface erupted with light, and Emily's cries grew louder, more desperate. Don't, the imposter screamed, its voice layered with something deep and guttural. With all his strength, Peter brought the shard down, shattering the heart into countless pieces. The room trembled violently, and a deafening roar filled the air as the shadows dissolved into nothingness. The imposter screamed, its body collapsing into ash before disappearing completely. Emily's voice echoed faintly, soft and distant. Mommy, ... The family stood in silence, their breaths ragged. The mirror lay shattered once again. Its frame splintered, and its surface darkened. Laura knelt on the floor, sifting through the shards desperately. Emily, she called, her voice breaking. Emily, where are you? From one of the shards, Emily's face appeared, her expression calm but sad. You did it, she said softly. But it's not over yet. And then her image faded. The Thompson family stood frozen in the aftermath, their breaths visible in the icy air. The circular room, once alive with the oppressive energy of the mirror, was now silent. The shards of the shattered heart lay scattered across the floor, glinting faintly in the dim light. But Emily's last words echoed in Laura's mind. It's not over yet. Laura knelt among the shards, her trembling hands sifting through them. Emily, she called desperately. Come back. The shards began to hum softly, their surfaces shimmering as distorted images swirled within. She's trying to tell us something, Peter whispered, gripping his shard tightly. One by one, the shards flickered to life, casting faint, eerie light across the room. Laura leaned closer, her breath catching as Emily's face appeared in the largest piece. "Mom," Emily said, her voice faint and crackling, as though coming from far away. "She's still here. Watching, ... double quotes. Who's watching?" Laura asked, her voice trembling. Before Emily could respond, the image distorted, replaced by the shadowy figure of a woman with hollow eyes and a cruel smile. "You've only delayed the inevitable," the figure said, its voice cold and hollow. "The mirror is eternal." The room grew colder, as the woman's image shifted across the shards, her gaze following each member of the family. "Who are you?" Tom demanded, stepping forward. The woman smiled faintly. "I am the mirror," she said. "And you, like all the others, are mine now." "No," Laura said, her voice firm despite the fear in her chest. "We destroyed the heart. It's over." The woman's laughter echoed through the room, sharp and mocking. "You destroyed a piece of me," she said. "But I am everywhere. Every mirror, every reflection, always watching." As the woman's laughter faded, the walls of the house groaned and trembled. Shadows began to seep from the cracks in the walls, twisting and writhing like living things. "We need to get out of here," Peter said, his voice shaking. Tom grabbed Laura's arm, pulling her to her feet. "Come on," he said. "We can't stay." The family bolted from the room, the shadows following close behind. The house seemed to shift around them, the hallways elongating and twisting, leading them in circles. "She's not letting us leave," Laura gasped, glancing over her shoulder. "She said she's in every mirror," Peter said, his eyes wide. "What if it's not just this house?" As they turned a corner, a faint light caught Laura's eye. One of the shards, still glowing, lay in Peter's hand. "Wait," Laura said, grabbing it. The shard flickered, and Emily's face appeared again, her expression panicked. "She's everywhere," Emily whispered. "But you can stop her. You have to, ... break her connection." "How?" Laura asked, desperately. Emily's image distorted, her voice fading. "You'll know, when the time comes, ... The shard went dark, the house erupted in chaos. The lights flickered violently, and the air grew thick with the sound of shattering glass. Every reflective surface in the house, from windows to picture frames, cracked. Spiderweb fractures spreading outward like veins. From each broken surface, distorted faces stared back at the family, their expressions twisted and menacing. "She's everywhere," Tom muttered, gripping the poker tightly. She wasn't lying. "We can't fight her like this," Laura said. "We need to find a way to break her hold completely." "But how do we do that if she's in every mirror?" Peter asked from behind them. The woman's voice echoed, "You can't." The family raced down the hallway, the shifting shadows closing in around them. The house groaned in protest, its walls bending and twisting as though alive. At the far end of the hallway, the front door loomed, its frame warped and flickering. "Go!" Tom shouted, pushing Peter ahead of him. Laura hesitated, glancing back toward the shards still lying on the floor of the circular room. "We can't leave them," she said. "What if we need them to stop her?" "We'll figure it out," Tom replied, grabbing her arm. "But we can't stay here." The family burst through the door, the cold night air rushing to meet them. As they stumbled onto the driveway, the house seemed to heave, the windows shattering outward with deafening force. The shadows retreated into the building, and for a moment, the family thought they were safe. But then Peter gasped, holding up the shard in his hand. The surface shimmered faintly, and the woman's hollow eyes stared back at them. "You can run," she said, her voice cold and calm. "But you can't escape me." Laura stared at the shard, her heart sinking. "It's not over," she whispered. Tom nodded grimly. "It's following us." From the house, a soft, melodic voice echoed faintly through the night. "Emily. ... Come back. ... The family turned, their eyes fixed on the darkened windows of the house. The mirror had won a battle, but the war was far from over. And somewhere in the night, a shadow moved, its reflection faintly visible in the broken glass. The Thompson family sat huddled in their car, the house looming behind them like a predator waiting for its next move. The air outside was unnaturally still, the oppressive silence broken only by their ragged breathing. Tom gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. "We need to leave," he said, his voice trembling. Laura glanced at the shard in Peter's hand. The faint image of Emily flickered across its surface, her expression desperate. "We can't just leave her," Laura said, tears welling in her eyes. "She's not in there anymore," Peter said softly, staring at the house. "She's somewhere else, inside the mirror." As the family debated their next move, the shard began to glow brighter, its surface rippling like water. Emily's voice echoed faintly, distant but clear. "Help me, ... Peter held the shard closer, his heart racing. "She's still alive," he said. "She's calling to us." Laura reached for the shard, her hands trembling. "Emily," she whispered, her breath fogging the glowing glass. "Where are you?" The shard pulsed, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to dissolve. The car, the driveway, the househole of it blurred and twisted, replaced by a vast, shadowy void. The family stood on a cold, reflective surface, their own distorted reflections staring up at them from below. Double quotes. "What ... is this?" Tom whispered, his voice echoing unnaturally. Peter knelt, touching the reflective ground. It rippled like liquid, sending waves across the surface. "I think we're inside the mirror," he said. Laura clutched the shard tightly. "Emily's here," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We need to find her." The void around them shifted, shapes forming in the distance. Twisted, jagged versions of their house loomed ahead, their walls cracked and bleeding shadows. "This place feels alive," Peter muttered, shivering as a cold wind swept through the void. From somewhere deep within the darkness, Emily's voice called out, "Mommy, ... Daddy, ... help me." As the family moved through the mirror world, they encountered distorted versions of themselves. Laura gasped as a reflection stepped out from the shadows, a twisted, exaggerated version of her, with hollow eyes and a cruel smile. "You can't save her," the reflection hissed, its voice dripping with malice. "She belongs here, now." Tom swung the fireplace poker at the reflection, but it dissolved into smoke, its laughter echoing around them. Peter pointed ahead. "Look," he said. In the distance, Emily's small figure stood on the reflective ground, her back to them. "Emily," Laura cried, running toward her. As Laura reached Emily, she realized something was wrong. The girl turned slowly, her movements stiff and unnatural. Her face was pale, her eyes empty. "Mommy," she said, her voice mechanical. "Why did you come here, sweetheart?" "We're here to take you home," Laura said, reaching out to her. But as her hand touched Emily's shoulder, the girl's face twisted into a grotesque smile. "This isn't your home anymore," she said, her voice layered with something deep and guttural. Laura stumbled back, her heart racing. The real Emily's voice echoed from the distance. "Mom, that's not me." The family turned to see the real Emily standing in the shadows, her hands bound by dark tendrils that seemed to grow from the ground. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Help me," she cried, struggling against the tendrils. Tom charged forward, swinging the poker at the tendrils. They hissed and recoiled, but more shadows surged forward, forming into the shape of the woman from the mirror. "You don't belong here," the woman said, her voice cold and echoing. "You'll never leave." Peter held up the shard, its glow intensifying. The woman recoiled, her form flickering. "Use it," Peter shouted, tossing the shard to Laura. Laura caught the shard and held it tightly, its edges cutting into her palm. She stepped toward the woman, her fear replaced by fierce determination. "Let her go," Laura said, her voice trembling but resolute. The woman smiled faintly. "You think you can defeat me?" she asked. "I am everywhere. I am eternal." Laura raised the shard, its light growing brighter. "You're nothing without your mirror," she said. "And I'm going to end this." With a scream, Laura plunged the shard into the reflective ground. The surface cracked and splintered, light erupting from the fissures. The mirror world trembled violently, the shadows dissolving into smoke. The woman let out a deafening shriek, her form collapsing into the cracks spreading across the ground. Emily's bonds broke, and she ran toward Laura, throwing her arms around her mother. "Mommy!" Emily cried, tears streaming down her face. "I've got you," Laura whispered, holding her tightly. The cracks widened, and the mirror world began to collapse. "Go!" Tom shouted, pulling the family toward the faint light that had appeared in the distance. "We need to get out of here." As the family ran toward the light, the world around them crumbled, the shadows clawing at their heels. Just as they reached the light, Laura glanced back. For a brief moment, she saw the woman standing in the distance, her hollow eyes filled with rage. "This isn't over," the woman said, her voice echoing as the lights swallowed the family. And then, everything went dark. The Thompson family woke up on the cold floor of their living room, gasping for breath. The house was eerily silent, the oppressive weight of the mirror's presence seemingly gone. Laura sat up, clutching Emily tightly. "Are you okay?" she asked, brushing hair from her daughter's tear-streaked face. Emily nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Is it over?" Tom glanced around the room, his grip tightening on the fireplace poker. "I don't know," he said cautiously, "but it doesn't feel right." The family stared at the spot in the hallway where the mirror had once hung. The wall was bare now, no sign of the ornate frame or its dark, menacing surface. "It's gone," Peter said, his voice filled with cautious relief. "We destroyed it." Laura shook her head, her gaze distant. "No," she said softly. "It's not that simple." "What do you mean?" Tom asked, frowning. Laura looked down at Emily, who clung to her stuffed rabbit. "She said it was everywhere," Laura whispered. "The woman, the mirror's not bound to this house." As the family began to move through the house, the tension in the air lifted slightly. The oppressive cold was gone, replaced by an unsettling stillness. "Do you think it'll come back?" Peter asked, glancing nervously at the reflective surface of the kitchen window. "I don't know," Tom admitted. "But we're not staying to find out." The family packed their belongings hastily, stuffing clothes and essentials into bags. Emily sat quietly on the couch, watching them. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Laura asked, kneeling beside her. Emily's gaze didn't meet hers. "I can still hear her," she whispered. Laura froze, her heart pounding. "What do you mean?" she asked carefully. Emily clutched her rabbit tighter. "She's still watching," she said, her voice trembling. "In the windows, in the glass, I can feel her." Tom stepped into the room, his face pale. "We need to leave," he said. "Now." Laura hesitated, glancing around the house. Every reflective surfacer, window pane, a picture frame, even the glossy finish of the dining table seemed to shimmer faintly, as though alive. Pack everything, Laura said, her voice shaking. We're leaving tonight. As the family packed, the house seemed to come alive again. The lights flickered, and faint whispers drifted through the air, too soft to make out. Peter paused in the hallway, his eyes fixed on a small shard of glass lying on the floor. He picked it up carefully, his heart racing as Emily's face appeared faintly in the shard. "Peter," she said, her voice distant. Peter stumbled back, dropping the shard. It hit the floor and cracked, the image vanishing. "Mom!" Peter shouted, running into the living room. "What is it?" Laura asked, panic in her voice. "She's still in the glass," Peter said. "I saw her." Laura grabbed the shard, holding it up to the light. The faint image of the woman appeared, her hollow eyes and cruel smile unmistakable. "You can't escape me," the woman whispered, her voice echoing faintly. "Wherever there is reflection, there I will be." Laura's hand trembled as she dropped the shard, stepping back. "It's not over," she said, her voice breaking. Tom stepped forward, his jaw tight. "Then we'll fight her," he said. "Whatever it takes." The family exchanged a determined glance, their fear replaced by resolve. That night, the family piled into the car, their bags crammed into the trunk. Tom started the engine, the headlights casting long shadows across the driveway. "Are we safe now?" Emily asked, her voice small. Laura reached back, squeezing her daughter's hand. "We're going somewhere she can't follow," she said. Though the words felt hollow, the car rolled down the driveway, leaving the house behind. But as they turned onto the main road, Emily glanced back. In the upstairs window, a faint figure stood watching them, its hollow eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The family drove for hours, the tension in the car thick. No one spoke, their minds heavy with the events of the past days. As dawn broke, the sky painted with streaks of orange and pink, Emily finally fell asleep. Her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly in her arms. "We're out of danger," Tom said, though his voice lacked conviction. Laura stared out the window, her reflection faint but visible in the glass. For a moment, she thought she saw it smile. The car pulled into a small motel, its parking lot empty and quiet. As the family unloaded their bags, Emily paused by the car window, staring into the glass. "Emily, come on," Peter said, nudging her. But Emily didn't move. Her reflection remained frozen, its eyes glowing faintly as a cruel smile spread across its face. "Mommy," Emily whispered. "She's still here." The motel room was cramped, but warm, a stark contrast to the cold, oppressive air of the house they'd fled. Tom double-checked the locks on the door, his hand lingering on the deadbolt. "We'll be safe here," he said, though his tone betrayed his doubt. Emily sat on the edge of one of the beds, staring at the mirror mounted on the wall. Her reflection stared back, unmoving, but there was something about it, something wrong. "Mom," she said softly. "It's watching us again." Laura quickly pulled the bedspread off and draped it over the mirror, obscuring it completely. "There," she said, trying to sound calm. "It can't see us now, but can we see it?" Peter asked, his voice trembling. Tom turned on the TV, its low hum filling the room with background noise. "We just need to get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow, we'll figure out our next move." Laura nodded, though her mind raced. The motel might be a haven for now, but the mirror's influence had followed them. She could feel it like a shadow lurking just out of sight. That night, Emily tossed and turned, her dreams filled with images of the mirror world. Dark shapes loomed over her, their hollow eyes staring as they whispered her name. "Emily, ... She jolted awake, gasping for air. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the TV. Her parents and brother were asleep, their breathing steady, but something felt wrong. The blanket covering the mirror had slipped, revealing part of its surface. Emily's reflection stared back at her, its eyes glowing faintly. "Emily," it whispered, its lips moving independently of hers. "Come closer," Emily screamed, waking the rest of the family. Tom grabbed the fireplace poker he'd brought from the house, rushing to her side. "What is it?" he asked, his voice filled with panic. Emily pointed at the mirror, tears streaming down her face. "It was talking to me," she cried. "It wants me to come back." Laura ripped the blanket down completely, revealing the mirror's surface. At first, it looked normal, but then the reflection began to ripple. The woman's face appeared, her hollow eyes locking onto Laura. "You can't run from me," the woman said, her voice cold and hollow. "You're all mine now." Laura grabbed the journal they'd taken from the house, flipping through its fragile pages. "There has to be something in here," she muttered. Peter leaned over her shoulder, pointing to a passage. "Look," he said. "It says that mirrors connected to the heart can be severed, but only if you face it directly." "What does that mean?" Tom asked, gripping the poker tightly. Laura's hands trembled as she read aloud. "The heart may be destroyed, but the reflection remains. To break its hold, one must confront the truth of the mirror." "What truth?" Peter asked, his voice filled with dread. Before Laura could respond, the mirror's surface began to glow, and the whispers filled the room. The journal's final pages described a ritual to isolate the mirror's influence, creating a temporary safe space. Laura and Peter worked quickly, using chalk to draw protective symbols on the motel room's walls. "Will this really work?" Tom asked, watching as Laura traced the final symbol. "It has to," she said, her voice firm. As the last symbol was completed, the air in the room shifted. The oppressive cold lifted slightly, and the whispers faded. Emily clung to her rabbit, her eyes wide. "Is it gone?" she asked. Laura knelt beside her, brushing hair from her face. "For now," she said, "but it won't stay gone for long." As the family began to relax, the mirror began to ripple again. This time, the reflection of the motel room twisted and distorted, the shapes within it barely recognizable. The woman's voice echoed from the glass. "You think this can protect you," she said, her tone mocking. "You're only delaying the inevitable." The symbols on the walls began to fade, their chalk lines smudging as though an invisible hand were wiping them away. "Mom!" Peter shouted. "The symbols! I see it!" Laura cried, grabbing the chalk. She rushed to retrace the symbols, but the mirror's surface erupted with light, throwing her back. The woman stepped out of the mirror, her hollow eyes scanning the room. "You can't stop me," she said, her voice cold and calm. Laura stood, her hands trembling. "You don't belong here," she said, her voice filled with defiance. The woman tilted her head, smiling faintly. "Neither do you," she said. "Not anymore." Tom stepped forward, swinging the poker, but the woman caught it effortlessly, tossing it aside. "This is between me and her," she said, nodding toward Laura. Laura's heart raced as the woman advanced, but something clicked in her mind. The journal had said the truth of the mirror must be confronted. "What do you want?" Laura asked, her voice steady. The woman stopped, her expression unreadable. "You already know," she said. Laura's reflection appeared in the mirror, her face pale, and her eyes filled with fear. "You can't escape yourself," the woman whispered. The light in the room dimmed, and the family's reflections began to twist and shift, their shapes warping into grotesque, unrecognizable forms. Laura clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. "If this is between me and you," she said, stepping forward, "then let's end it." The woman smiled faintly. As you wish. The motel room plunged into darkness, the faint glow of the mirror casting eerie shadows on the walls. Laura stood in the center of the room, her gaze locked on the woman's hollow eyes. "Mom, don't," Emily cried, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "I have to," Laura said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. She stepped closer to the mirror, her reflection twisting and distorting with every step. "If we don't end this now, it'll never stop." The woman tilted her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Brave," she said, her tone mocking, but foolish. Laura stood inches from the mirror, her own reflection staring back at her. But it wasn't her, which was a warped, exaggerated version of herself, with hollow eyes and a cruel, twisted smile. "You think you can fight me," the woman said, stepping closer within the glass. "I am you. Every fear, every doubt, every failure, I've been with you all along." Laura's chest tightened, her breath catching. "You're wrong," she said, her voice trembling. "You're not me." The woman laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally. "Oh, but I am," she said. "And that's why you'll lose." Behind Laura, Tom grabbed the fireplace poker, his hands shaking. "We're not letting you take her," he said, his voice filled with determination. The woman turned her gaze to him, her eyes narrowing. "You can't save her," she said, her voice dripping with malice. "You're all mine now." Peter grabbed the chalk and began retracing the protective symbols on the walls, his movements frantic. "Keep her distracted," he shouted. Tom swung the poker at the mirror, but the woman caught it effortlessly, her hollow eyes gleaming. "Is that the best you can do?" she sneered. The mirror's surface rippled violently, and the distorted reflections of the family stepped out, their movements jerky and unnatural. Tom's reflection lunged at him, its twisted face contorted with rage. He blocked it with the poker, the impact sending him stumbling backward. "Peter, hurry!" Laura shouted, dodging as her own reflection reached for her, its hollow eyes burning with malice. "I'm trying," Peter yelled, his hands trembling as he finished the last symbol. The room trembled as the symbols flared to life, their light forcing the reflections to recoil. The woman hissed, her form flickering. Emily clutched her rabbit tightly, her eyes locked on the mirror. "Mommy!" she cried. "She's getting weaker." Laura glanced at the journal, its pages fluttering in the chaotic wind swirling through the room. Her eyes landed on a passage she hadn't noticed before. "The reflection's power lies in its anchor. Destroy the mirror, and the connection will break, but only if the truth is faced." "I have to end this," Laura said, stepping forward. The woman's smile faded, her expression darkening. "You can't," she said, her voice layered with anger. Laura pressed her palm against the mirror, the cold glass sending a chill through her body. Her reflection stared back at her, its hollow eyes filled with hate. "I'm not afraid of you," Laura said, her voice steady, the reflection's smile twisted into a snarl. "You should be," it hissed. The mirror began to crack beneath Laura's hand, the fissures spreading outward like veins. Light erupted from the fractures, and the woman screamed, her form flickering violently. "You can't destroy me," she shrieked. "I am eternal." "No," Laura said, her voice firm. "You're nothing without the mirror." With a final push, Laura drove her fist into the glass, shattering it into countless shards. The woman let out a deafening scream as her form dissolved into the light, the reflections vanishing along with her. The room fell silent, the oppressive energy lifting. Tom rushed to Laura's side, his hands shaking. "Are you okay?" he asked, pulling her into a tight embrace. Laura nodded, her breath ragged. "It's over," she said softly, though her voice carried a note of uncertainty. Emily ran to her mother, tears streaming down her face. "Mommy," she cried, wrapping her arms around her. Laura held her tightly, her own tears falling freely. "It's okay," she whispered. "You're safe now." Peter knelt beside the broken shards, his eyes scanning their surfaces. "I don't see her anymore," he said, his voice filled with relief. Tom looked around the room, his grip on the poker loosening. "Do you think it's really over?" Laura hesitated, her gaze lingering on one of the larger shards. For a brief moment, she thought she saw her own reflection, her eyes glowing faintly as the family packed their belongings, ready to leave the motel. Emily paused by the car window. She stared at her reflection, her face pale. "Mom," she said softly. Laura turned, her heart sinking as she saw the faint image of the woman's hollow eyes, staring back at them from the glass. The reflection smiled. "It's not over," Emily whispered. The Thompson family drove away from the motel, the shattered mirror left behind in a heap of broken shards. The morning sun cast long shadows on the road ahead, but inside the car, the silence was deafening. Emily sat in the back seat, staring out the window. Her reflection moved with her, but every so often, she thought she saw it glance at her, a flicker of independent motion that made her stomach churn. "Mommy," she said softly, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "She's still here." Tom tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road. "It's just your imagination," he said, though his voice trembled slightly. "No, it's not," Peter said from the passenger seat, glancing at the rear-view mirror nervously. "I feel it too." Laura sat quietly, the journal open in her lap. Her eyes scanned the fragile pages, searching for reassurance that the ritual had worked. But the words felt hollow now, their promises of safety undermined by the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. "What if we didn't finish it?" she whispered, her voice breaking the heavy silence. Tom glanced at her, frowning.
"What do you mean?"
"The journal said we had to face the truth," Laura replied. "But what if there's more to it? What if we didn't completely sever the connection?" As the car rolled into a small diner parking lot, the family decided to take a break. The air felt lighter here, far from the motel and the cursed house. But as they sat at a booth, Emily's gaze drifted to a mirror on the far wall. Her reflection stared back at her, its hollow eyes faint but unmistakable. "She's watching," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Laura followed her daughter's gaze, her heart sinking as she saw the faint outline of the woman in the mirror, her cruel smile barely visible. "We need to keep moving," Laura said quickly, grabbing Emily's hand. "What is it?" Tom asked, his tone sharp. Laura shook her head. "She's not gone." That night, the family found another motel, its plain walls devoid of mirrors or reflective surfaces. Laura sat at the small desk, poring over the journal once more. "There's something we're missing," she muttered, flipping through the pages. Peter sat on the bed, holding one of the larger shards they'd taken from the shattered mirror. "Do you think this is why she's still here?" he asked, his voice trembling. Laura looked up, her eyes widening. "It might be," she said. "The shards, if they're still connected to her, she could be using them to follow us." Tom stood in the doorway, his expression grim. "Then we get rid of them," he said firmly. "All of them." "But how?" Peter asked. "We can't just throw them away. What if someone else finds them?" "We destroy them," Laura said, her voice steady. "Completely. Fire, acid, whatever it takes." Emily's eyes filled with tears. "But what if she gets angry?" she whispered. "She already is," Laura said softly, pulling her daughter into a hug. "But we're not letting her hurt you. Not ever again." The family gathered the shards into a small metal box, their sharp edges gleaming faintly in the dim light. Tom carried the box to the motel parking lot. where he had set up a small fire pit. As he dropped the first shard into the flames, the air around them seemed to shift. A low, guttural whisper filled the space, growing louder with each shard. "You can't destroy me," the woman's voice hissed, echoing through the night. Peter stumbled back, his heart racing. "She's in the shards," he cried. Laura grabbed the last piece, her hand trembling. "This ends now," she said, throwing it into the fire. The fire roared to life, the flames turning an unnatural shade of blue. The woman's face appeared in the smoke, her hollow eyes glaring at the family. "You think this will stop me?" she snarled, her voice layered with malice. Laura stepped forward, her fear replaced by anger. "You don't belong here," she said firmly. "You don't get to control us anymore." The woman let out a piercing scream, her form dissolving into the flames. The fire burned brighter for a moment before fading into embers, leaving the parking lot eerily quiet. The family stood in silence, the air around them still and heavy. Emily clung to Laura's leg, her small frame trembling. "Is she gone?" Emily asked, her voice barely audible. Laura knelt down, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "I think so," she said, though her own doubt lingered. Peter stared at the smoldering fire, his hands clenched into fists. "What if she's not?" he asked. Tom placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we'll deal with her again," he said. "Together." As the family drove away from the motel, a sense of relief began to settle over them. The oppressive weight of the mirror's presence seemed to have lifted at last. But in the shadows of the backseat window, Emily's reflection flickered faintly, her eyes glowing softly as a cruel smile spread across her face. Months passed, and the Thompson family began to piece their lives back together. The cursed house on Ashwood Lane was behind them, and the motel where the shards had been destroyed was a distant memory. But some wounds lingered. Laura often caught herself staring into reflective surfaces, her breath catching whenever her reflection seemed too slow to move. Emily refused to sleep without her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly in her arms. And Peter, though silent about it, avoided mirrors altogether. For now, the family was safe for, so they thought. On a quiet afternoon, in a different town, a moving truck pulled up to the old house on Ashwood Lane. A young family stepped out, their voices filled with excitement as they explored their new home. The youngest, a boy named Max, wandered up to the attic, drawn by a faint glimmer of light coming through a crack in the floorboards. He knelt down, prying the boards apart with his small hands. "Mom, look what I found," Max called, holding up a shard of glass. The shard caught the light, its edges sharp, and its surface shimmering faintly. Max turned it over in his hands, fascinated by the way it reflected his face. But as he stared into the shard, his reflection began to change. His eyes widened, and a faint smile spread across the reflection's lips, one that didn't match his own. "Max, honey, come downstairs," his mother called from below. Max blinked, the strange smile gone. "Coming?" he shouted, slipping the shard into his pocket. That night, as the new family settled into the house, the shard began to pulse faintly from its hiding place in Max's room. The air grew colder, and the shadows in the corners of the house deepened. Max lay in bed, staring at the shard on his nightstand. He thought he heard something, a faint, melodic whisper that sent a shiver down his spine. "Max, ... He sat up, his heart pounding. "Who's there?" The shard glimmered in the moonlight, its surface rippling like water. For a brief moment, he thought he saw a face in the glass hollow eyes, and a cruel smile staring back at him. The whispers grew louder as the days passed, and strange things began to happen in the house. The lights flickered, objects moved on their own. and Max swore he saw shadows darting across the walls. His parents dismissed his fears as overactive imagination. But Max knew better. The shard wasn't just a piece of broken glass, it was alive. One night, as he lay awake in bed, the whispers grew louder. The shard glowed faintly, and the woman's voice echoed through the room. "Max," she said, her tone soft and inviting. "Come closer." Drawn by an unseen force, Max reached out and touched the shard. The glass was icy under his fingers, and the room seemed to spin around him. From the shadows, the woman stepped forward, her hollow eyes fixed on him. "You'll do nicely," she said, her smile widening. Max tried to pull his hand away, but it was too late. The shard pulsed with light, and his reflection began to twist and shift, its form becoming something unrecognizable. Downstairs, his parents heard a faint tapping sound, like fingernails on glass. "Did you hear that?" his mother asked, frowning. "Probably just the wind," his father replied, though unease crept into his voice. By morning, the shard was gone from Max's nightstand. The family went about their day, unaware that the boy who sat at the breakfast table wasn't quite the same. Max smiled faintly, his movements a little too smooth, his tone a little too sweet. "I like it here," he said. His mother ruffled his hair, smiling. "I'm glad, honey." But Max's reflection, caught in the silver surface of a spoon, didn't move. It simply stared back, its hollow eyes glinting faintly as the woman's cruel smile spread across its face. As the new family settled into their life on Ashwood Lane, the shard waited, its influence spreading through the house like a creeping shadow. And somewhere, in the flicker of a mirror or the glint of glass, the woman watched. Her presence as eternal and inescapable as the reflections she inhabited. The cycle had begun.